Hey there, hi there, hello there, and welcome to week 4 of the Seventh Valkyrie read-along and director's commentary following the release of A Slanted Reflection. You can, if you're watching this, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, you can already see me. Hi, hello. If you are listening to this, you know that you can watch it on Facebook, on YouTube. If you're watching it, you know that you can listen to it on the podcast. And there's also a blog version that I've sent out to subscribers on my email list and on the webpage, 7thvalkyrie.com/blog. If you haven't checked that out, I put these up, and I'm actually going to be working on this week, starting to put out some new content, both a little series on writing that I've been working on, and creating, and just kind of in general, kind of some tips and tricks for getting into the world of creating, and just kind of thoughts on writing and such, as well as a little review recommendation series, which is basically just an excuse for me to geek out over shows that I love. Anyway, as always, new readers beware. I'll be going over spoilers, so if you haven't gotten to Chapter 9, Chapter 10, and Chapter 11 yet, then pause this, put it on hold. You can go get the book right now on 7thvalkyrie.com or on Kindle, on various other platforms. Without any further ado, we've kind of gotten this down to a science at this point, so rolling on into this episode. Chapter 9, Among the Twisting Streets. Now, this is the first one that we have from an outside perspective. We have Strana kind of as our main character here. And that's something that we'll see pretty steadily on occasion throughout the series. I say, steadily on occasion. It's a device that I'm going to be using. I don't expect them to be that frequent of recurring contributors, because I don't like it when a series has like 1,000 people and you get sick of you're like, when do we get back to the people we actually like? I feel like this is a story about characters, and it's about 3 characters in particular. But I really like getting to step outside them. They're still involved, and they're still in the story, and you still feel them. But I like being able to look at them from the outside. I have a piece that I wrote up and have drafted, so we'll get to that on our writing series. But I always thought it was interesting that the closer you get to a hero, the more you see their human side, you also have kind of a decrease in the bit of their mystique. And especially when you're writing fantasy, this is particularly powerful. Like, the more you get to know someone, the less they become this sort of legendary hero. It's an old adage in horror movies too. Like, something is scarier the less that you know about it, because it's the unknown. And I think that can be true for heroes as well. Sometimes the less we know about people, the more they're mysterious, the more they're like, ooh, like, oh, I want to learn. They can be kind of legends. A big part of this series is that there is humanity behind these legends. I think right now, if you just cast your mind back through history, there's tons. I just saw the trailer for the new Hamilton movie. There's tons of people who have reached sort of legendary status, but each of them was a person. And I remember when I was watching The Last Dance, which was the Michael Jordan documentary, I thought it was really great how they were able to look and kind of move from this like very deep look at like a person and still capture kind of the mystique behind this absolute legend of sport. It's something that I try and do a little bit of in Seventh Valkyrie, and it's something I try to kind of do an example of in this chapter. Is we get out of Cyrus, Val, and BC's perspectives, and because we have this very intimate look into their mind, and when we get to see from the outside, we get to see kind of how people around them are perceiving them. And I'll go into this a little bit more on my Wednesday series on writing. So cool. So I'll see you guys on that one there. But moving on, a little more about our 9-year-old little narrator. I'm a 23-year-old man, and yet somehow I feel like I connect with Strana more than almost any other character in the entire series. I think it's just because she's so wide-eyed and pure. She's curious about things that it's fun to be curious about, to the point where she gets in trouble. She's scared at the things that are scary. She loves Gooba, this dumb, bouncy owl thing, for no particular reason. And she follows someone strange and terrifying just to help them, and then heals them without a second thought. I feel like when I'm acting like Strana, when I'm in my Strana zone, is kind of when I'm at the happiest. Then I'm kind of acting like a puppy, and as my neighbors will tell you, because despite a scary world and despite things being kind of scary, Strana still has that joy, that childlike spark. and it's just a wonderful thing to be able to tap into sometimes and write. So it was really fun to write about Strana. Also in this chapter, we get to kind of step outside our characters in more way than once when we see the Old City awakening. Volume 0 had a very Edara-centric view, with the Freelanders sort of very much as this outside other. They were kind of hidden. But throughout this volume, we get to look a little bit deeper at the structures and societies and kind of we get to see into the Freelanders. We kind of get to start to unpack them. Obviously there's a very strong aversion to rulers, kind of a powerful spirit of independence, but there's also what kind of comes together in this chapter is a very, very strong unspoken unity in the face of the most prominent threat to them, which is Edara. In this chapter, they sort of just meld together kind of instinctively. And I imagine that's kind of a big reason of why the Edarans are so afraid of them. If I could better comparison to kind of like the Vietnam War, the Freelanders don't have the population or organization to stage a massive war and conquer the Edarans, but when pressed and sort of fighting in their own home, on their own terms, kind of here and there, and kind of coming together, it's like they're very, very dangerous, which really puts the Edarans on edge. And that tension between Edara, the Freelanders, between these two these types of societies that are all fundamentally different, is a really big part of the series. These 3 chapters are a little shorter, so this is going to be a little shorter of an episode. Happy Monday. So moving on into chapter 10, which is the shortest chapter that I think I've ever written so far, besides prologues and epilogues. The Awakening Hunger. And this one was a little experimental. I remember I actually I came home one night after a few bottles of wine, and I just sat down and just I almost closed my eyes and just kind of fired out the first half of this piece, kind of Cyrus's little mental breakdown, and it was very raw, and I edited it very, very little because it was just an outpouring of emotion. I tend to think that writing, really any form of art, really is sort of a soul-to-soul connection. At its purest, it's it's like this link between me and then everyone who's encountering this. There's something I feel, I think, I care about, and I want to share it with you. The medium that I choose, writing, art, film, sculpture, sport, singing, music, there's a bunch of different ways to do that, but that medium is just how I convey that the soul-to-soul connection. And sometimes I love to have kind of experimental or style-breaking chapters like this one. I remember, so kind of it's just fun to kind of get to mess around and not be beholden to one particular way of writing or method of writing, and especially because of the chapter form. Sometimes I get to have ones that are, I get to hop out and I get to experience Strana's life. I get to go bonkers with Cyrus for one, and each one is kind of just this little piece of a story that we're weaving together. So it's funny. In the past decade, I've probably watched more TV shows and movies than I've read books. Scandalous. Because I was spending so much time writing that I'd get tired of reading, and I was like, ugh, I've been grinding out. I just want to kick back and blah. Which is a funny turn of events, but one of the things I loved from shows and from TV shows was their episodic nature. You kind of have the same overall universe, same characters, same arc, but you can tell these kind of self-contained little stories with different styles and different qualities, and they can all just drip with love and passion and art, and you can get kind of experimental with each one. Manga is a great example of this. They do that a lot in manga. So every once in a while I like to find chapters like this one to just break up the style and just be totally different. Because it's sometimes I'm telling a story where it's I have a character who's telling you the story. I'm in Cyrus's brain, and it's he's sitting in front of you telling you the story. Sometimes I like it for kind of a third person, for it to be you're watching a movie, what's going on. I'm a very visual thinker sometimes, where it's oh, I want to see this happening, boom, 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 boom. And then sometimes I even try and get really in there and try and have it feel like you are experiencing it. there's no real plan, no strategy to it. Like, I just kind of write what feels right in the moment, just kind of following the voice of the art. But I love the ability to kind of bounce back and forth and not have that feel disjointed, because each one is its own little episode. Each one is its own story that contributes to this overall arc of, like, we know the events that are happening, but the emotional weight of each one hits a little differently. And speaking of emotional weight, we finally get a little bit more emotional weight from Cyrus. Cyrus has a long, long journey ahead of him, especially as a character and as a person to grow. He's a young guy. He's not, it hasn't been established, and he's not quite sure, but he appears physiologically to be, kind of late teens, early 20s. Like, he's a young guy. And we finally see a little bit of the edge behind this kind of like withering and fluffy exterior of Cyrus. He's been very innocent, very naive, and kind of spent the past volume just like going, cry, 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 cry. As many of us would in this situation. But this was a chapter where we start to see that's like he's kind of starting to get a little fed up with it. Like he's getting a little. You can only be like whimpering and afraid for so long before you just kind of run out of juice. And he's starting to get a little. Something's sparking up in him, and he's that's going to be a big part of his growth is kind of that journey from him being kind of like a passive actor being kind of pushed around to like taking a little more charge. That's a long journey though. So and where will that lead us? Who knows? But one thing I can say is that no one leads a life like him, and no one has an experience like this and comes out totally unscathed or unchanged. Anyway, moving on into the last chapter of this particular round of Director's Commentary, which is Chapter 11, A Strange Presence, where we finally get to see kind of these stories slowly starting to intermingle. All these things have been very independent up until now. We've seen the shadows of the Machine King. We've seen, the same attack happened in, similar in Min's has happened in Sunsetten. And we know that Cyrus and we know that Val and BC are both in Reen, but this is the first time that we really start to see two characters that have overlapped, which is, we see Pores, who has been in both stories. And now it's like, oh, wow, like now we're starting to see these stories come together, and that's when things get really, really fun. And we have another chapter that comes from Straina's perspective, and, we have... It's like as we see these characters coming together, we kind of start to see like how they think of each other too. For example, we see Straina perceiving Val and the impact that he lives on the world around him. Like to her, he is a man like nothing else she's ever seen, and through Straina, we can see that very literally. It's really cool to be, and as these characters all come together, it's like you see that, Pores, who's this very tough guy, like who's lived his whole life in the pit, like, and even he is like unsettled by what Val is doing, even though Val is damaged, even though Val is beaten and nearly broken. It's like Pores is like, I still don't really want to mess with this guy too bad. So you really get to see kind of the outside, you start to see these people colliding, and there's more in this Reen conflict to come. Speaking of conflict in Reen, in this chapter we kind of see more and more opening up into this world of magic here. I hate to call the gifts of the Extranaturals magic, because there's I think I mentioned before, there's very much a system that it operates on, and it's a physical force within the world of Edara and beyond. But it's a force that definitely doesn't exist in our world. So to us, it's pretty much magic. It's definitely very elemental. It definitely has a system of rules to it that we're going to unpack as the series goes on. But we get to see the veil comes back even further. In this chapter, where through Straina we get to see the healing of Val and the Hounds, and we get to see how much Rama has the ability to heal Val, and it's really the first time we get to see exactly how much gifts change the world. Val is on the edge of death. He's beaten down, his shoulders torn apart, his hounds are struggling to survive, and then all of a sudden, it's like it just takes these two admittedly powerful life weavers to rejuvenate him, and all of a sudden he's come back and is feeling not necessarily perfect, but is healed, is saved. He was shaky. And the hounds are kind of thrown by this as well, since they've never seen someone with wild speech, someone who can literally talk to them and communicate. And they've definitely never seen this healing. And that's a very distinct difference between the world of Edara and the world of. It's like you have this this magic that has an effect on life. Like this changes the very way that life, society, fighting, it all happens, and it's that's a very distinct difference. And it's kind of irreconcilable at this point, and that circling back always between there's such a divide between Edara and Freelanders because they literally live with different sets of physics. And I mean that's a hard anytime there's different social and cultural groups, there's boundaries, but when you throw in such a fundamental difference like that, things are that's a hard divide to overcome. More of we see more and more of kind of these two worlds that are kind of crashing together, and how even in the best of with the best of intentions, it's there's some risk, and that theme is a huge one in this series. When I was young, I was always enthralled with the idea of good and evil. I loved the idea of there were bad guys and there were good guys, and especially during war, it was very clear who was who. As I've grown up, I've seen that that's not. The gray area is far, far more complicated. I remember being very young during the Second Iraq War, and being really confused because I had my very limited perspective of obviously we're the good guys. Why is everyone really up in arms about this? Why are we confused? What's happening? Why is it so complicated? And then as you grow older, you hopefully start to see that many shades of gray exist in war, and in conflict, and in the clashes between cultures and nations and peoples, and you see this happen, with the Freelanders and Val. We know that Val is pretty well intentioned, and he's just looking to wipe out the Machine King, but the Freelanders are pretty rightfully nervous. He's a scary guy. He's a huge dude who has just fought through, he just escaped from prison, walks here with these two enormous dogs who are just utterly under his command, and he's willing to stand up to Pors and threaten him even while on the edge of death. And the Freelanders are dude, we were scared of this dude beforehand. It's we might as well throw him back in the river. It's just rid ourselves of this issue. And yet, you have the added complication of you have this childish perspective of Strana, who is no, there, we don't have to worry about good and evil. It's we should help people who are hurt. And as these, as the Freelanders, as these Renians are saying, should we not? It's Strana just kind of rushes in to save Val, and it's all right, that's it, that one touch of innocence. And we have kind of a. This is a good way that can happen. It's and I hope in the series, it's not going to turn out this way. It's but it's in these times of indecision and weariness and wariness, it's one moment can change everything for the good or for the bad. And we see kind of this one moment of inspiration and joy, and good, but who knows what's coming down the line. So. Anyway, so that's chapters 9, 10, and 11 for this week, and we'll see you next week. I haven't been getting any comments or any questions. People who listen to this that I know, let me know if you have any questions, Mom, Dad. I know Mom hasn't listened to it. Anyone who's been listening to this series, if you have any questions, please let me know. Once we, I'm trying to figure out a way. And any feedback, is 3 chapters a week, is that too long? I think it's a good rate. I know not everyone has time to read recently, so hopefully everyone can go back to it. But it, maybe when we have more people reading along, we'll be able to kind of get a little bit better of the little interaction, because I'd love to answer you guys' questions and and kind of get this interactive. But anyway, worst case is I just keep talking about kind of behind the scenes stuff. So works for me. Anyway, in the meantime, for next week, make sure you listened to or read Chapter 12, which is The Slicked Oil, Chapter 13, The Weary After Dawn, and Chapter 14, A Whispering Filth. It's getting good. We're getting into the thick of things. Anyway, stay safe, and in the meantime, as always, in the words of Bill and Ted, be excellent to each other. Bye. Ba, 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 ba.